Okay, everyone. Well, we are very pleased to have Professor LUCKIN to be here, present research and perspectives. Yes. Nancy has introduced Rose a little bit, so let me introduce a little more about you. So, Professor LUCKIN is professor at UCL, University College London. And she's a leading scholar in the field of educational technology and AI, the topic today. And in 2017, she was named one of the 20 most influential people in education in the 7 list. And in 2023, this year, and she was named one of the Computer Weekly's top 50 most influential women in technology. That's very impressive. And Rose has published widely in journals, book chapters, especially news media. And I saw, two books. Okay, one of the books was published in 2018, Machine Learning and Human Intelligence: The Future of Education for the 21st Century. And it's good to know that it has been translated in Mandarin. And I very highly recommend us to read this book, both in Mandarin and in English. And another recent book, AI for School Teachers, which was published in 2022. It's an essential and accessible guide to AI for anyone in education, including researchers, teachers, practitioners. Okay. And Rose also founded Educate. It's a Ventures Research Limited. Yes. And it's a London hub for educational technology, researchers and teachers. It's a technology startups and for educators who are engaged in evidence-based technology and to leverage data and AI to benefit education. Okay. And also, Rose has taught in secondary level and in further education and in higher education. And she also has held various senior leadership roles in higher education. And she is currently the president of the self-managed learning college in Brighton and hosts the EdTech podcast. It's a very long, I just picked several elements to introduce Rose. So now let's invite Rose to give the keynote speech.
Introduction. That's very kind. And it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to colleagues at Hong Kong University and also East China Normal University. It's really lovely to be part of this event. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentations this morning. They were absolutely great. I want to talk to you today from a perspective of trying to engage with teachers, particularly training teachers to understand and leverage artificial intelligence. One of the reasons that I wrote the book that's just been mentioned, AI for School Teachers, was because I was concerned to try and engage teachers in wanting to understand about artificial intelligence. But I wrote that book before ChatGPT appeared on the scene. And it's been much easier to engage people talking about AI since ChatGPT arrived on the scene. But it's something that's very close to my heart. So I want to look through this talk at how we can engage educators to really want to understand AI and to help us to take, as one of the presenters this morning has already said, that education to lead the way when it comes to AI. So you know what artificial intelligence is, but I always think it's useful to start with a definition. And in particular, I like this one because it makes the point that AI is about technology that analyzes its environment and takes actions with some degree of autonomy. And thinking about the presentation about self-regulated learning, it's that autonomy in adaptive learning systems that I think is part of the challenge. So the autonomy has both positive and negative aspects to it. And these systems act with a certain amount of autonomy towards specific goals. And of course, they could be software or hardware instantiated. But of course, as we know, AI is not new. Now, all of you as students will understand that what I'm showing you here is good old-fashioned AI, that transparent AI, that AI that is very easy to interpret because it's based on rules and it can explain exactly why a decision has been made. But I like to look back across the history of AI in order to situate where we are now, because I think it's really important. And there are three things I want to highlight in this slide. First, that 1956 Dartmouth College meeting, which I think is probably where I would place the birth of modern artificial intelligence. 12 people, Nancy, they were all men, got together at Dartmouth College in the US, and their aim was to understand all of human cognition in such detail that they could specify it sufficiently to automate all of it. That sounds crazy now because of what we know, because we know that actually our human cognition is so much more complex than would ever have made that possible. But I think it's really important to remember that, particularly at moments like now, when we're being faced by lots of claims about what artificial intelligence can do. I think it's worth standing back and thinking, yes, but there's still a lot about human intelligence that we don't yet understand. The next one I'll pick out from there is 1957, Rosenblatt's perceptron, the first neural network. Okay, it was very simple, but we think of machine learning and neural networks as being very, very modern, but actually the idea was right there back in 1957. And then, of course, we've got that famous 1997 moment when IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, the then chess grandmaster. Now, I was studying artificial intelligence at this time. Yes, I am that old. And I remember being in an AI and computer science department at the time, and people were really excited. They really felt that we cracked intelligence because we built a machine that could play chess at this level. Intelligent people play chess, therefore. And then, of course, we had the winter, when people realized actually things like vision were so much harder than playing chess. And so in this millennium, we focus much more on machine learning and neural networks and deep neural networks, and there have been some amazing moments. And it's certainly true that these technologies are very powerful. But as our presenter this morning has already highlighted, they're not very transparent, and they can be very difficult to explain what they've been doing. It can be very difficult for them to explain how they've made a decision. So they have their limitations too. But I think, yes, AlphaGo beating Lisa Doll at the game of Go was a moment when people woke up to the power of AI, and particularly the power of deep neural networks. And I like to point this one out as well. 2018, first learned large language models. So the technology that's causing a lot of the storm at the moment has been around for a while. But of course, it's the fact that we have them and they're available to everybody that's making a difference. I also like to point out that AI in education is not new. Many of these systems are really quite old, and I'm going to pick one that is actually very old. Now, of course, Century Tech is more up to date, but this one here, which I'm going to look at in a bit more detail, is actually really quite old. But these systems, yes, they are adaptive learning systems. They take advantage of AI's ability to be adaptive, to behave autonomously. But let's just look at this one. I like to look at this one because I think it really pulls together a lot of different sorts of artificial intelligence. And I think it is a combination of different sorts of artificial intelligence that often gets overlooked when we're talking about the impact of AI. So this one is a system called SimSensei. It was born out of the University of Southern California. We have Avatar sitting in the chair. She's playing the role of a counsellor for students. We have a student who's before the counsellor seeking a counselling session wearing that black and white checked shirt. Now, SimSensei, the counsellor, has been trained on lots and lots of data from previous student-counsel interactions. It's a machine learning system. It has that historical training and can be adaptive in the way that it interacts with the student. But it's also complemented by this real-time data about the student's facial expressions, about their voice, not just what they're saying, but the speed, the pitch, the tone, which means there's some real-time analysis of the student's emotional state. And that's fed into the interactions as well. So it's a highly sophisticated AI system that's combining historical and real-time data. In 2014, I think it's really important to keep what's happening now in perspective. These very smart systems have been around for a long time. They're not generative systems, as these large language models are, as anything based on that transformer model is, but they are sophisticated AI and they have been around for a long time. And AI, as many of you are studying analytics, AI can also provide enhanced analytics that can show the learning process as it happens. So we have dashboards, are much smarter than this one. We can look at multimodal data. This is taken from an experiment we did several years ago looking at collaborative learning and using multimodal data to try and analyse what's going on as students are working together. And increasingly, brain data can be taken into account. So we have an enormous bandwidth of data that can be taken into account as we build these adaptive, intelligent systems to support the teaching and learning process. But what is new is this freely available AI. And at this point, I just want to tell you a story. So I was very lucky a few weekends ago to be at an event with David Putnam. David Putnam is an Oscar-winning film producer. He's quite elderly, so some of you may not have heard of him, but he is a world-famous film producer. And he was telling the story of the movie industry. He pulled from his pocket a roll of celluloid film and said that when he was making Chariots of Fire, the film for which he won an Oscar, one of his big jobs was calculating how many rolls of his film he needed in order to record the movie. And then digital technology came along. You need to do that at all. Digital technology, whilst it has absolutely transformed the movie business and has enabled services like Netflix and other streaming systems, that transformation didn't actually happen overnight. When it happened very quickly. It was actually the movie Avatar that precipitated the big transformation, because Avatar was 3D and movie cinemas couldn't show it using old-fashioned production. So they had to buy into the new digital technology, and with 18 months, no jobs for projectionists anymore. There's a huge transformation had happened. And so I often like to think about our ChatGPT moment as perhaps being the Avatar moment for AI, and particularly AI in education. So whether it's EarlyBot or whether it's ChatGPT, these tools are very useful for teachers. They can be used, as I'm sure many of you are already doing, to design resources, to analyse dialogue, as we've seen this morning, to analyse documents. They can be enormously useful and they're freely available. And that is a huge difference. And that's the big difference. I think here, perhaps you use Bing Chat more, although actually talking to Kate this morning, I think there's another system that enables you to use a wider range of large language models. But across the world, there are many of these generative AI systems available at scale for anybody who wants to use them. And of course, they're not just language, they're also based on images as well. And we've really got to this point because we now have access to these huge data sets. And as I was showing earlier, those data sets can be incredibly rich with data from multiple modalities of interactions between people, data that can include brain data, so much information. We also, of course, have much more powerful computers. When I was a mere undergraduate studying computer science and AI, if we had a program of any size, we had to run it overnight. I've got more power on my phone than we had on those systems, and they continually crash, by the way, as well. So we have so much at our fingertips. And of course, we've got very sophisticated AI algorithms that can process that data and from which we can learn. Lots of AI is now very easily available to use, and it does produce human-like behaviours. Anybody who's interacted with any of these generative AI systems, they're very impressive in the quality of the interactions that you have with them. It makes me think back to my early days of studying AI, when one of my first tasks my first assessment in my first year was to build an ELIZA program. And I'm guessing people know what ELIZA is, but it was probably one of the first chatbots, and it was very, very basic, just pattern matching. The one I built was politician, because I figured that politicians had a very limited answer range, and therefore it was probably possible to build a chatbot that actually mimics a politician quite accurately. But it's a long way from that where we are now. Actually, things are still changing very quickly. I think it's a very uncomfortable time, particularly for educators at the moment, which is why I'm so concerned to try and engage educators in wanting to understand AI. Because there's a lot happening. Policy, frameworks, guidelines all over the world are still being formed, and we don't really know what they're going to be. We've got the AI Act in Europe, lots of activity there. We've got lots of activity in the US, we've got lots of activity in Australia. All over the world, there are different people trying to pull together frameworks, regulatory guidelines. But there's a lot happening, and the products themselves are changing rapidly. I mean, we had the conversation this morning, which version of ChatGPT did you use, 3 or 5? Because that's the one that was existing when I was doing the study. Fair enough. We've now got 4, we've now got multimodal, ChatGPT. It's happening very quickly, and that's difficult. So how do we help teachers to navigate this space and to feel that they can be strategic and thoughtful when there's so much happening? I find it useful to take 3 lenses when I'm thinking about AI and education. I think we need to think about the tools, which is a lot of what I've spoken about already, the sorts of systems we can use to support teaching and learning. And there are many ways that AI can support teaching and learning. But I think we also need to think about what the existence of AI in the workplace increasingly and in our lives means for what education needs to provide for students. And certainly self-regulated learning is something very important for the future. Then there's learning about AI, which again, is supremely important. I think probably the biggest practical challenge facing the education sector at the moment is the need to capacity build within staff and students so that they can feel comfortable using AI and can use it safely and effectively and without feeling anxious about it. Looking at those AI tools, yes, I gave you this slide earlier. These have been around for a long time. Some of them very nice systems. This one here, N Skills from Alelo. You can have a conversation with the avatar on the screen in English to help improve your speaking and listening skills. It's a very impressive system. And we've already looked at SimSensei and seen that that's a very sophisticated AI system too. And I think these are probably ones that many teachers are using at the moment, whether it's Canva for producing materials, Conga for assessments. Magic AI is one that I'm hearing quite a lot about from teachers, something they're finding quite useful. And yeah, GID for producing videos. That's a very interesting one and just shows the kinds of things that you can do with these technologies. But what can we do when it comes to using AI as a tool in the classroom? How can we help teachers to think about this? Well, certainly there's that adaptive personalised learning that we've already talked about this morning. There's automated grading, adaptive assessment. I think that's a very fruitful way for AI to be used. For me, the AI-powered dashboards for learner analytics is supremely important. Being able to help us understand the learning process, not just the learning outcome, is really important. When I was a humble secondary school teacher many, many years ago, before I studied AI, I can remember teaching students who were struggling. I had a group of students who were really struggling. They came from very poor family backgrounds, didn't have much resource at home. And it was often really hard for me to find a way to motivate them and to be able to show them their achievements, because their achievements didn't really map to the system. If I had these AI-powered tools and dashboards, I would be able to show them so much more about their progress, the detail of their progress in learning, and I could imagine how valuable that would be. Content generation, of course, super useful, can save time. Chatbots, lots of those around at the moment, and they can be quite useful and good. And teacher assistants, I think that's how I like to see AI and how I try to persuade teachers to see AI. It's an assistant. It's your superpower. It can make you the best teacher you want to be. It's not in charge, you are. It's often hard for them to see that. But really the challenge, I think, is this new skills focus. What is it we need our education systems to do now that we have these very sophisticated forms of artificial intelligence that can do a lot of the things that we have treasured as outputs of our education systems in the past? And you mentioned this book in your introduction, thank you. The English version is now freely downloadable. I've made it open source because I feel it's actually more relevant now than it was when I wrote it back in 2018, because it really looks at human intelligence and how it's different to artificial intelligence. Because I think we need to hear more about human intelligence. There's a lot of conversation at the moment about the technology of AI, and that's important. But actually, it's our human intelligence that's going to help us navigate our future. And it's really important that we think about it carefully. So this version is really downloadable. The version in Mandarin, sadly, is not free. It's published by Cheers in Beijing. And I'm sorry that version isn't free, but the English version is free. And it's hard to sum up a book in one slide, but I'm actually going to try and do that. But when I wrote the book, I looked across multiple disciplines to try and understand the different ways in which we conceptualize intelligence. And I came to the conclusion that what I wanted to do was conceptualize human intelligence in a way that made it possible to differentiate human intelligence from artificial intelligence. And so I came up with a way of talking about intelligence through these different lenses. But I want to stress these are not separate intelligences, although highly influenced by the wonderful work of Howard Gardner on multiple intelligences. That's not what this is really trying to say. This is talking about a very complex human intelligence that combines all of these different elements. And so, yes, we have our interdisciplinary academic intelligence, and our AI systems are pretty good at this. You know, they can pass most exams. They're pretty good at subject and interdisciplinary academic knowledge. Then meta-knowing, and I don't mean metacognition by that. I know that phrase meta-knowing is used in some places to mean metacognition. What I mean by that is epistemic cognition. So our ability to understand what knowledge is and where knowledge comes from. Now, back in the 1960s, Perry did some very interesting work at Harvard University, looking at the sophistication of the personal epistemologies amongst undergraduate students. At Harvard, you would expect students to be relatively intelligent, and I'm sure they were. But actually, the results showed that students had a very naive view of where knowledge came from. They definitely saw it as something that was provided to them, that was offered to them, that was given to them. They were exposed to knowledge by more knowledgeable others, much more than seeing it as that active construction process that we know that it is. And sadly, I don't think much about modern technology has done much to improve student personal epistemic sophistication. I think in a lot of cases, it is hard for students to make, well, for all of us, to make good judgments about whether we should believe something to be true or not. But we certainly need to do that a lot. And it is part of our human capability to learn what good evidence is, to triangulate evidence before we decide whether we're going to believe something's true or not. And we need that more and more as we're faced with more fake information through the use of AI. Of course, AI can, to a certain extent, do this too. Social intelligence, how we learn through social interaction. And social intelligence is supremely important. The problems we face in the world today are so enormous, we can't possibly solve them from a single person or even a team coming from the same discipline. We need big teams working together, so we need to be socially intelligent. And to an extent, AI can at least mimic some of that. So you could consider those elements of our human intelligence on the left-hand side of the screen as being accessible to our AI systems. The one on the right are not. So metacognition, you all know what metacognition is. Supremely important. We know it helps us to become good at learning, and we certainly need to be good at learning. Because what's got AI where it is the fact that it's really good at learning. Meta-subjective intelligence, so that's our awareness of our own emotional intelligence and of the emotional intelligence being developed by those with whom we are interacting. Meta-contextual intelligence, and this is the one I think we underestimate the most. We are incredibly good at moving around the world, apparently seamlessly. We don't really bulk at moving into different places that we've never been to before, interacting with people we've never met before, interacting with our environment where we've never been before. It requires huge amounts of intelligence. And it's very, very hard for AI. And then if we get all of this sewn up nicely together, we get some accurate perceived self-efficacy, which means that we can be really intelligent in the way that we interact. We can be very self-aware. We can set ourselves goals beyond what we can achieve, but we can know how we can achieve those goals, how to learn, who can help us, what we need to do. And that makes us a very whole, rich human intelligence. And really, the AI can only do that cognition part, that part that really doesn't strike this meta-intelligence. Now, there are some AI systems being developed that are being described as metacognitive AI. And they do have rudimentary metacognition. It's rudimentary in that it mimics the building blocks of metacognition that we find in our own brains. So the kinds of building blocks that exist when we're very, very, very young. This is so rudimentary, we wouldn't really call it metacognition if we were looking at it in a human. So it's not that we don't have any metacognitive AI, it's just that it's so rudimentary, we wouldn't really consider it to be metacognitive. So AI is a long way from being able to achieve any of this meta-level intelligence. And yet we can be incredibly good at it. We're not necessarily naturally good at it. We need to be taught, we need to be helped, we need to be supported. Now I'm going to tell you another story. I do love telling stories. So the second story coming up. Now this is a story that goes back to 1983, and a gentleman called Stanislav Petrov, who had the unenviable task of monitoring the Soviet Union's first defense systems. So he was in charge of monitoring whether the Soviet Union was under attack. This is 1983, so this is the height of the Cold War between Russia and the US. And Stanislav is going about his duties one day in 1983, and he notices the system flash up the fact that there are 6 nuclear missiles on their way to Russia. Now these are 6 missiles that will start World War III. And Stanislav thinks of it and thinks, I really don't think that's right. I cannot believe that in this moment in time, the US is sending 6 missiles that are going to absolutely trigger World War III. So I'm going to log that as an error. It's a very brave thing to do. He was right. It was the satellites mistakenly identifying the sun glinting off clouds as 6. Now that's a story that highlights the failure of technology, but the supreme nature of human intelligence. Because a lot of what we build our meta-awareness on is that ability to deal with uncertainty. That was an uncertain situation he was faced with. Now, that's a very precise uncertain situation. But a lot of our complex human cognition is grounded in that same ability to constantly deal with uncertainty, to constantly look at how likely we think X is X, or how likely it is that X actually isn't X. And we are really good at that. And we need to build on that. So I think the way that we need to think, and the way that I certainly try to encourage educators in the education system to think about the kind of framework that we might have for our education systems in order to help us deal more effectively with AI. And this was something that I produced for the OECD back in May this year. is that, of course, numeracy and literacy will always be fundamental. There's no way that we're ever going to not need to be numerate and literate, not in any of our lifetimes, I don't believe. But then I think we do need AI literacy, and Nancy mentioned AI literacy this morning. I think we absolutely need AI literacy. And yes, we need some people who understand the intricate details of the technology, but we need everybody to understand the non-technical details of AI literacy. These are the two that really matter: learning mastery and knowledge mastery. So learning mastery is a combination of all of those meta-intelligences that mean that we are good at learning, because that's what we need to be. And knowledge mastery is about really understanding the world, ourselves. There's a wonderful book that I recommend to you, written by the metacognitive neuroscience Steve Fleming, who's also at University College London, like Diana and I. I do read books by people who come from other universities too, by the way. But Steve Fleming's book, which is called Know Thyself, and interestingly, that's where the story of Stanislav Petrov comes from, is really accessible, and I highly recommend it, because it really talks about the importance of knowing ourselves. And for anybody who's also read Noah Yuval Harari, he's a very famous philosopher, and his book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, that basically ends with the statement that we better know ourselves, because if we don't know ourselves properly, the AI surely will. So being self-aware, self-knowledgeable is supremely important. So what then happens to those traditional subject areas that we've spent so long creating our exams to test? Will they then become the medium through which we develop these advanced, sophisticated thinking expertise, I'm going to call them? Because the word skills appears to cause lots of problems. People get very vexed about the difference between knowledge and skills. And so I would call them sophisticated thinking skills. But in order to try and avoid that problem, I think we should think of them as expertise, because surely we need to be expert at them. And if we get it right, we can tie these things together so that, yes, we still learn our physics, our math, our geography, our history. It's important. They are the medium through which we really gain this learning mastery and knowledge mastery. And these are the things that we need to start assessing. And the wonderful thing is, of course, that AI is the answer, as well as the precipitator of the problem, because AI can help us to measure the way we are developing these advanced thinking skills. And I know Kate this afternoon will talk a bit about metacognition in the real classroom context and tell you some wonderful work that's been done at North Anglia Education. But going back to the teacher, yes, we need to help them understand about the importance of developing these sophisticated thinking expertise within their students. But we also need to help them learn about AI. We need people to be able to answer the question, what does it mean for my school? What does it mean for my teaching? What does it mean for my learners? This AI, what does it mean? How can I leverage it? What's the key benefit that I can derive? Now, this is just an example of some data, and it's just a set of 47. I've got various different versions of this from different groups of teachers that we've run this diagnostic on, and they all come up with a very, very similar pattern. And what you'll notice is, oh, I think I'm pressing the wrong button now. Oh, lost the light. Oh, there it is. Doesn't show very well on the white. Okay, so let's look at where we've got most confidence. I understand the general concepts of AI. So these are questions that teachers were asked. I have a good understanding of how AI can be used in schools. I create resources and materials with AI. Okay, we've got quite a few there. I am confident using AI in the classroom, far less so. I use AI in my teaching to personalise learning. Low. I use AI tools to reduce my workload, much higher. So further towards the edge, and note none of them are very far towards the edge, so we're not seeing a lot of confidence being reported by teachers in general, but certainly the areas of least confidence are where it comes to actually using it in the classroom. And again, I think Kate this afternoon will reflect on the difficulty of using innovative technology in the real high-stakes classroom. So there's certainly teachers reflecting that they are engaging with AI, but they struggle to think about being confident at using it actually in the classroom. But it's a step in the right direction that they're using it. We certainly need to help them to understand what AI is, what tools are available, but also to think about how they can use it, what are the risks, what can it do to empower their teaching. And we certainly need students to be aware, and we need policies in place. Now, I've been in Singapore and Taiwan in the last couple of weeks, and I'm super impressed by what's happening in those countries, as I am with what's happening in Hong Kong. I think you are embracing the need for teacher education with respect to AI, policy initiatives, which is absolutely the right way to go. And I will say something a little more about ethics, as Nancy highlighted the work with the Institute for Ethical AI and Ed right at the start in her introduction, and we'll come back to that. But I think these are challenges and opportunities for schools and teachers that we need to help them navigate. What are the new competences that they'll need in order to use AI? So what is AI literacy? How should teacher training programs adapt in order to engage with AI? How can educational organisations develop effective strategic plans, about which I'll say a little more in a moment, in order to help them leverage AI? What's the impact on the teaching profession as more and more workplace and professional activities are automated? Now, my answer to that is that it becomes ever more important, because the human interaction is what really matters. So, thinking about that strategic point, I think there are different ways in which we need to think strategically about artificial intelligence. We certainly need sector leadership. And that's what I've seen as I've been travelling recently, is real sector leadership saying the education sector needs to engage with this. And here's ways in which we can do that, in which we can support professionals to do that. And then institutions need their AI strategies. Because I think those that have an effective AI strategy will be the ones who benefit. It should be based on the existing vision. It doesn't necessarily mean, or rather, the fact that we have these sophisticated AI tools doesn't necessarily mean one has to alter the vision of what one wants to achieve through education. But we certainly need to work out what the impact of AI is on the way we strategically go about achieving that vision. How can it bring about proportional benefits? How can it even perhaps save money? Where will it be most successful? And then this important part about capacity building, because if we don't do the human capacity building so that all educators feel confident in their use of AI, then I think we absolutely move into a very bad space. Because, reflecting again on the first speaker, we need education to lead what happens with AI, not the other way around. And that means we need a much better educated professional workforce when it comes to AI. And so, thinking about what I was just saying about vision and strategy, I think if we're thinking about strategies for educational institutions, yes, there needs to be, right up top, governance and ethics. What are the parameters in which AI and EdTech can be explored, tested and implemented within the establishment? But then thinking across different units of application, different parts of the establishment, where might AI be used first to demonstrate what it can do, to build capacity? And that decision may well be made based on the existing technology infrastructure, the existing data infrastructure that will exist to varying different extent in different parts of an organisation. And then that staff capability. Where in the institution is the most staff capability combined with the technology and the data? So that's where you can have your first experiment with AI, and then iteratively build on that as you build capacity, as you build knowledge, as you build more examples of what can be done. And there are some big questions that I think educators are already starting to ask. And these are the sorts of questions we need to help them answer, like this one down here. What does our AI journey look like? Where are we going? How will we get there? Very practical questions of what teachers want answered in order to help them make this transition. and we need to help them to do that. And finally, but actually most importantly, ethics. So yes, back in 2018, that was the year, the book and the launch of the Institute of Ethical Artificial Intelligence in Education, which was a time-limited project launched by St Anthony Selden and Priya Lakhani, who's the founder of Century Tech. The aim was to raise a flag and say, education really matters when it comes to ethics and AI. There were many initiatives to look at AI and ethics, data and ethics, but none of them were focusing specifically on education. And we were worried that education wasn't being given enough attention. Because let's face it, education is the most important of all of the areas that any government might be concerned with. Because if you have an educated population, you have a more healthy population, you have a more prosperous population. We want people to engage with education throughout their whole lives. I can't think of another service like that. I mean, health service, we want people to engage with it as little as possible because we want them to be fit and well because they're well educated. So we launched this on that basis. Now, I can't go into it in detail without the time, but again, that link is a link. It's still freely downloadable. The framework we developed is still freely downloadable from that web link. And basically, it's a 4-page table set out like this that goes through objectives, criteria, and a checklist. And it's basically a checklist for educators. A checklist that says, here are the questions you should be asking yourself if you are introducing AI into your establishment. And yes, Nancy was part of the international panel that helped us boil down 3 years worth of research and analysis into this 4-page framework. It doesn't speak specifically about generative AI, but it's still absolutely relevant to generative AI as well as AI more generally. And these are the objectives that have to be part of which are the 9 objectives that you'll find throughout the table. And as I say, it breaks down the objectives into different criteria, and then there's a checklist. It's a very practical document. And following on from this, in the UK, we have something called the Epsom-Bourne Protocol, which is, again, launched by Sir Anthony Selden, is an initiative that is bringing together examination organisations, practitioners, and technical experts to develop a protocol for the way that AI can be used beneficially in education. And that's following on and building on the work of the Institute. So to conclude, from a perspective of educators and trying to engage them with wanting to use AI and feeling confident being able to use it, and indeed the educational establishment, I think we need to recognise, as I know all of you in this room will do, that AI is ubiquitous, and whether we like it or not, it's part of our lives, it's part of the workplace, it's something we have to embrace. There is no choice about that. Unfortunately, even if we wanted to, we can't turn back the tide. It's in the hands of people, both good and bad. And that's something that we have to cope with. So educational organisations simply must have a strategic AI plan in place. And that must include governance, but crucially, it must also include capacity building to ensure that everybody in the establishment is confident and competent and doesn't feel off kilter because of this very uncomfortable situation we're in at the moment. I think this is probably, I hope, peak discomfort because there's lots and lots of new technologies arriving and we don't have the regulation in place yet. We don't have the guidelines in place yet. So it's really hard for us at the moment. It's very uncomfortable. But I think if we can help people get through this uncomfortable space, if we can help them deal with the noise around the tools that are being launched onto the market, help them feel able to deal with that in the here and now, and to step back and think strategically, okay, how is this going to make me a better teacher? How can I do more for myself, more for my students, more for my organisation? Then we will have achieved what we need to achieve. And I do believe, just as our first speaker reflected this morning, that education and educators should lead the way in developing artificial intelligence. More importantly, human intelligence. Because if it isn't the education establishment that leads the way when it comes to how we evaluate, how we measure, how we develop the advanced human intelligence that we will absolutely need if we're actually going to navigate ourselves through this AI world successfully, then who is? I think it's really important to recognise that we've talked a lot, and there's so much being said every day in the media about artificial intelligence, how quickly it's developing, how amazing the progress is. But this isn't finished. Our human intelligence isn't a finished work, it's evolving. We are evolving. And the way that we evolve our intelligence through our education systems is what will be decisive in how AI impacts on the world, how it impacts on education. So I think education absolutely has to lead the way. And I'm going to leave you there with that final comment. Yes, this is the book, AI for School Teachers. It uses cooking as an analogy because I love cooking. And so I decided that we would use, that's a very female pursuit, I suppose, although I don't know, no, that's an unfair statement, isn't it, Nancy? You know, men and women are both good at cooking. It's just that I think women probably cook more in the house. I don't know. Anyway, it's trying to communicate some of the complexities of machine learning in very everyday terms. It was written with a school teacher who's actually going to be in Hong Kong tomorrow, Karine George, and my lovely colleague Luca Grover from the Knowledge Lab at UCL. That's unfortunately not free, but there are some free audio chapters at that link, and there's also a free AI readiness course for any educators or anyone who's interested at that link, and that's all part of Educate Ventures Research, which, as Nancy mentioned, is the organisation that I founded and which is very much involved with trying to help businesses and educators navigate the AI landscape. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Luckin, for sharing your insights and your research. Really thought-provoking. So now we have time for discussion, Q&A. Yes, I will start from you and then we'll turn to the online. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Luckin. Really inspirational speech, and I really learned a lot from that. And I have two questions. Actually, first one, you mentioned AI-powered dashboards for a learner analytics. Do you mean like a system, like an intelligent tutoring system that can precise students' data like really quickly and provide personalized feedback?
I mean something, is it right for me to talk without the microphone? I'm just thinking about the recording. Thank you. Yes, but more. So thinking about analytics at a much larger scale. So if you think about a student any day, perhaps they're at school, there are many different touch points they have with learning as they go through their day. Many of them can be captured using technology. Many of them will be captured using technology. Now, I must say at this point, of course, there are many ethical implications when it comes to capturing data. But if you think about the way that we can capture very rich data about each person's interactions in the world, and the sophistication of the AI that we've now developed to analyze some of these. Now, we can't know everything from this, but there's huge amounts of work being done in various different academic disciplines, looking at the extent to which we can learn from data traces, for example, about things like self-regulated learning, about things like persistence, about things like resilience, as well as, are you understanding your quadratic equations? So I'm thinking about dashboards that cover more than the interactions that you would get with an intelligent tutoring system, but you can think of the starting point as being the sort of thing that an intelligent tutoring system would do, but on a much greater scale. And so those dashboards can inform the teacher, but can also inform the students. Again, going back to the self-regulated regulated learning talk this morning, with the right support, students learning from their own data will be one of the most powerful ways in which we can help them to develop those really important meta-intelligence skills and expertise. You said you had 2 questions.
Thank you so much. I actually watched one of your videos on AI in education, and in the video you said we have built a system that's so intelligent because they can process data and process information far better than human. And we have already observed the impact of AI on higher education. So what's your view? I'm really curious. What's your view for AI's impact on elementary education, like for primary school, when they learn really basic stuff? Will that be a problem? Because in the future, when they grow up, they will have AI everywhere, but if they only learn the content, then the knowledge will be a problem for them to adapt to the future life. Thank you.
That is such a good question. And there's lots of different ways I could answer that. Yes, we have created very sophisticated AI, but part of the reason, in fact, the main reason that I did the research behind the book that I talked about was because I want people to realize what the AI is and what it isn't. So if you take something like a large language model, it's really good at processing bits of words to produce, or bits of images, whatever the media is, to produce something that's very high quality as a collation of those bits. But that AI has no conceptualization of what any of those words mean in the real world. Now, there is a school of thought developing that those large language models are developing their own models of the world, and that their responses are based on those. But even if that is the case, and I'm still trying to work out myself what I believe in that respect, they're very rudimentary models of the world. They're not the real world that we experience and we can understand. And much of elementary education is about understanding the real world and understanding ourselves. That's still as relevant now. And although, yes, you're right, students who are in elementary education at the moment, their world will be so different when they come into the workplace. We can't even really conceptualize what it will be like. So it is difficult. But I think your question also highlights one of the real challenges at the moment. And that is, where do you focus attention and resource in the education space? Do you focus on older students who are going to the workplace now? Do you focus on younger students? Because it's very hard. There are limited resources. Where do you focus attention? And I can see arguments for saying, let's start with the youngest, let's start. But I can also see arguments that say, let's start with the students who are facing the challenge of going into the workplace or onto higher education now. It's a really difficult question to answer. But I think, as with much of what's happening at the moment, one of the best ways to navigate is to work out what is it the AI can do and can't do, and what is different about our human intelligence, because that's still as important in elementary education as any other part of the education system. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much.
Oh, excuse me. I think we have a question online.
Another excellent question. Right. I worked in AI for 30 years. And for 29 of those, I have believed that AI can be a huge force for increasing equality. I've thought of it as being a tool that can help students who have no teacher at the moment have an access to education. It's a tool that can individualize tutoring to help students who are struggling, to provide really differentiated education. It can help students with special needs. If we think about the amazing things we can do with AI, for speech interfaces, for physical interfaces, it's phenomenal. Unfortunately, this year, I've become less convinced that AI will be the greatest force for increased equality, because at the moment, it's very unequal. What we're seeing happening is incredibly unequal. Basically, there are a few people who run large technology companies who are absolutely dictating what is happening. And that's a very unhealthy situation. And I don't think they're interested in equality. I think they're interested in making a lot of money. And making a lot of money and equality don't often go hand in hand. So I feel really bad giving a negative answer, because for 29 of my 30 years working in AI and education, I have really good. And by the way, I get spine tingles as I say this because it upsets me so much that I now don't believe that AI will be this great equalizing force. It could be. If we were to make the right decisions, it could be. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's such a power imbalance, and there is so much ignorance about AI within the people who are making very important decisions all over the world. And I don't mean that rudely when I say people are ignorant. Nobody's encouraged them to learn about AI. They haven't learned about AI. They're hugely disadvantaged at the moment when they're trying to make decisions, because there are these few people who are calling the shots, and they're very hard to argue against. So we are in a really difficult spot at the moment, and I just hope that I can go back to my position of 29 years standing, where I feel that AI will be a force for good. It certainly can be. But again, it's why I think we've got to give educators a much louder voice in what is happening. I mean, in the UK at the moment, this week, there's an AI summit happening. Lots of people from across the world are descending in the UK for a cybersecurity summit, an AI summit. Don't think they're talking about education terribly much. Now, there is going to be an education event, but it's a fringe event. It's happening later in the month. And I think that's a shame, because actually education is fundamental to the way that AI does or does not do good in the world. And so somehow we have to leverage back some kind of power for education in these debates. And it means that all of us have to start shouting about, we need to consider education when we're talking about AI, because, you know, that's what it will be, people who will make the difference if enough people speak, and a lot of people are. But yes, in answer to that question, I'm sorry, it's not a very positive answer. But the positive side is that yes, AI could be a great force for increased equality.
Yeah. Thank you. Earlier on, I saw a raised hand in Zoom. Is that possible?
We basically support text-based.
Okay.
So I can type in chat that if you have questions, you can post it.
Yeah, for online listeners, if you have any questions, you can type your questions in chat. So let's, yeah.
I have a question
Wait
regarding
a moment.
I think I can figure out.
It's okay.
My question is about K-12 teacher educations. So we know a model TPAC, which proposed before the AI thing. So when the model is developed, they will not consider the difference between machine intelligence and human intelligence. But since you mentioned about the human intelligence more focused on those meta things, so in your perspective, what can we propose in these new kind of models to help the teachers to develop their competence? And the second thing is, in ancient China, our examination-oriented culture, so it's more focused on evaluation, what to evaluate and how to evaluate. So in these meta things, do you have any idea regarding this?
Such good questions. I'll do the second one first, and then I will come back to TMAC, which is really about implementation research and how you do things in practical sense, which actually is very relevant, I think. I'm assuming I know something about what Kate's going to talk about this afternoon, but I think I know a little bit and say that it's highly relevant to that. Many countries have assessment systems, as you describe, and it's really hard to work out how best to move on from those. We must move on from those because we have AI that can do those. So we need to have assessment systems that assess the things that AI can't do, including how well we work with AI. As an anecdote, but I think it's relevant, I was hearing, and it will be with You said I was host of the EdTech podcast, which is absolutely right. And we're currently recording a 5-part series on AI in education, sponsored by North Anglia Education. And in one of the episodes that has not been launched, but we have recorded it, we have a wonderful description by Sugata Mitra of a study done in Israel of students taking an exam, a standard examination, and for the first time they were allowed to take their mobile phones into the examination with them. They could take their mobile phone in, they could use their mobile phone for whatever they wanted, they could look up whatever they wanted as they were doing these exams. What happened? Predictably, everybody's scores went up, but less predictably, the students who traditionally would have been at the top, the students who traditionally would have been at the bottom, won. But maybe those students were better at using the tools. Now, we don't want an assessment system to necessarily evaluate whether you're good at using the tools, but it does kind of demonstrate the point that actually our assessment systems are very particular in what they assess and who they work for, and we need to move on from that. It's hard because, on the one hand, you do not want to devalue the qualifications that many students have worked incredibly hard to gain. So how do you change without devaluing all of that hard work, which we mustn't do, obviously? It's also hard to change because many people have worked incredibly hard to design the current systems. I mean, I know in the UK, we have a schools minister who's very deeply wedded to the current curriculum and the current assessment system. It's very well designed, it's systematically designed, we know how it works. And that's all true. The problem is it's not what we need now, it's what we needed last century, it's not what we need now. So it's really hard to move on, but we have to move on. And I think the way it's likely to happen is that more change will happen around the edges. Employers will start to pay less and less attention to the formal qualifications. And over time, more systems will develop that do evaluate, do measure, do assess things beyond what the current assessment systems do. So hopefully we will be able to have in place an alternative system as the current one becomes less accepted. But I don't think it's going to be a comfortable journey. It's another bit of discomfort to come. The question about TPAC, which really I always feel is a framework for implementation research, is also really important because it's one thing for technology, whether it uses AI or not, to be used effectively by a particular teacher in a particular setting for a particular group of students. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work everywhere. And the way that technology, including an AI technology, is implemented makes a fundamental difference to how effective it is. I remember when I first started studying, and I bet Diana remembers this as well. Do you remember David Wood's work with integrated learning systems? So integrated learning systems were very, very early. Would you call it a sort of adaptive? Very early. They were meant to be early adaptive learning systems, but very, very simple, I think would be fair. And there was quite a significant evaluation done across multiple schools in the UK of these systems. No significant findings other than different schools had different results. Hey, that's because they implemented it differently, because their contexts were different. So I think it's no different when we're thinking about AI technologies. The way they're implemented will make a fundamental difference to how successful they are. I think what's important is that we come up with good ways of capturing where they work, why they work, for whom they work, in evidence that can be shared through communities of teachers, so that we can share the successes and the failures as well, and learn from those, so that everybody has a better chance of implementing the technology and understanding how it's implemented effectively.
Okay, just one last question. Okay, we still have time to discuss. So
I'm here, you can ask me over lunch.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I think the most interesting part for me is the difference between machine intelligence and human intelligence. Like we discussed before, what makes us human. And my question today is about how to be self-knowledgeable for ourselves, because there's an old philosophical question from ancient Greece times, is know yourself.
Yes.
It's really hard to answer. Everybody needs to think about it. And from our educator perspective, how can we facilitate our learners to be self-aware?
Very good question. And again, I think from a self-awareness being a component of metacognition, Kate will say something about this afternoon. But actually, that phrase you use, know yourself, is the title of the book that I mentioned earlier. And that book is interesting because it gives you a neuroscience perspective on some ideas about how you can improve your own self-awareness, your own metacognition. They're very fledgling ideas from a neuroscience perspective, but there is a body of work that shows us how we can explicitly teach metacognition. But it's never done in a vacuum. It's always done within the context of a particular subject area, of a particular activity. And so I think we need to give teachers more opportunities and more resources to understand how better to teach these higher order thinking capabilities within their normal practice. And that's where I think we can make a big difference in what we provide for them, because we certainly know it's possible, and that's what we surely must do. As I say, this is not finished work. We need it to get smarter and smarter and smarter.
Okay.
Thank you.